Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, the Supreme Court clears the way for ICE agents to continue Southern California raids. The High Court granted President Trump's emergency request to overturn a ruling that restricted immigration stops in Los Angeles. And in a separate case, the Chief Justice lets Trump remove a member of the Federal Trade Commission. Arlene Richards has the legal update. President Trump is still eyeing Chicago for the next crime crackdown. The Department of Homeland Security is already stepping up operations in the city. Jason Blair brings us the latest. 2 terrorists opened fire on people at a bus stop near Jerusalem, killing 6 people and injuring over 20 more. And in the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces have now destroyed 50 buildings in one of Hamas's final strongholds. Jason Perry with the details. At a border security meeting with Five Eyes allies, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem says she doesn't think a recent immigration raid at a Hyundai plant will deter investment in the U.S. Malcolm Hudson has the highlights from that meeting in London. And the French government falls apart after the parliament ousted a second prime minister in less than a year. What's next for President Emmanuel Macron? David Yves reports from Paris.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. A majority of the Supreme Court grants President Trump's emergency request to overturn a ruling that restricted immigration stops in Los Angeles. And in a separate case, the Chief Justice lets Trump remove a member of the Federal Trade Commission. NTD's Arlene Richards has the details.
In a 6-3 ruling on Monday, the Supreme Court restores the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to detain suspected illegal immigrants in Los Angeles. The majority decision puts on hold the July 11th ruling by a Los Angeles-based district judge who said immigration agents could not stop people because of their race, language, job, or location. And it clears the way for federal agents to continue immigration operations in the city. The lower court judge had found that agents were conducting indiscriminate stops in and around Los Angeles. Justice Brett Kavanaugh said in a concurring opinion on Monday that immigration law permits agents to interrogate individuals believed to be illegal immigrants. He said given the circumstances in the Los Angeles area, such as an extremely high number and percentage of illegal immigrants who typically work in certain types of jobs and tend to gather in certain places, it was reasonable for agents to be suspicious. Justice Sonia Sotomayor said in a dissenting opinion, joined by Justices Ketanji Brown Jackson and Elena Kagan, that the government shouldn't be permitted to seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work in a low-wage job. She said many people had been mistreated and handcuffed, for example, because of their looks and their accents. The court's ruling to pause the lower court's injunction will remain in place while the government appeals that court's decision. In another Supreme Court emergency decision on Monday, Chief Justice John Roberts granted the administration's request to remove a member of the Federal Trade Commission. President Trump attempted to fire Rebecca Slaughter in the spring. Lower courts ordered that she be reinstated, ruling that the administration could remove her only for cause, like misconduct or neglect of duty. Roberts halted those decisions in a brief order, but asked opposing counsel to respond to Trump's arguments. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
A federal appeals court today rejected President Trump's arguments to overturn an $83.3 million jury verdict. The 3-judge panel ordered him to pay for defaming writer E. Jean Carroll. Trump's attorneys had argued the judgments with both excessive and invalid, relying on a Supreme Court decision that expanded presidential immunity. They challenged actions by the trial court judge, such as a portion of Trump's testimony thrown out and the jury instructions on punitive damages. The panel concluded the lower court's challenged decisions were correct and that the jury's damages awards were fair and reasonable. Ms. Carroll had sued President Trump in 2019 over 2 statements he made denying allegations of sexual assault. President Trump reiterates his plan to increase safety in Chicago while making positive comments about the current operation in Washington, D.C. The Department of Homeland Security announces increased activity in Illinois and Chicago as Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker maintains his opposition to federal deployment. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
We'll fix Chicago.
During remarks to the White House Religious Liberty Commission, President Donald Trump says that he's eyeing Chicago for a similar operation that's now underway in Washington, D.C.
We'd love to go into Chicago and straighten it out. You know, Washington, D.C., you'll be happy to know, is a free and safe zone. It's so safe right now.
Trump also criticized
cashless bail started a wave in our country where a killer kills somebody and is out on the street by the afternoon. In many cases, going out and killing again.
Last week, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker said that if the White House sends National Guard troops to Chicago, he'll immediately push back in court.
That's going to be our first line of defense, is getting a court to issue a TRO or other injunction against that activity.
Pritzker has openly opposed ICE agents operating in the city and has encouraged residents to do the same.
If you have the opportunity, please protest. Pull out your phone, video everything that they're doing.
On Monday, DHS announced Operation Midway Blitz. The department says the ICE operation will target criminal illegal aliens who have flocked to Chicago and Illinois. And it's, quote, in honor of Katie Abraham, who was killed in a drunk driving hit-and-run car wreck caused by criminal illegal alien Julio Kukulbol in Illinois. And this announcement comes one day after White House Board Czar Tom Homan says that ICE activities will be increasing in Chicago and other cities around the country.
You can expect action in most sanctuary cities across the country. President Trump's prioritized sanctuary cities because sanctuary cities knowingly release illegal alien public safety threats to the streets every day. That's where the problem is.
Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Ministers of the Five Eyes Alliance agreed on principles for asserting more control over their borders. They plan to combat and disrupt human smuggling criminal gangs, as well as discourage immigrants from crossing borders illegally. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more for us.
Tackling criminal smuggling gangs and increasing border security are at the top of the agenda as Homeland ministers from the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, that's the US, Britain, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, meet in London. US Secretary of Homeland Security Kirsty Noem has been a leading figure in the Trump administration's approach to illegal immigration.
I would say the best progress that we can make with these 5 countries is agreements on sharing background information on transnational organizations, gangs, cartel members, terrorists that would wish to do our citizens harms.
Noem said that criminal gangs and cartels use social media to push their message, and said the Five Eyes allies need to be aggressive in pushing back against this. She said she is very vocal about messaging.
People around the world need to know that when you break the law in the United States of America, there's consequences for that, and you will be deported, and that you will not get the opportunity to come back to the United States.
She said she doesn't think the detention of illegal immigrant workers will deter investment in the United States. It comes after 475 workers, including over 300 South Koreans, were detained last week in an immigration raid at a Hyundai plant in Georgia, a move that shocked many in the US allied nation. Noem said such tough actions mean there is no uncertainty about the Trump administration's policies. She said that 1.6 million people who were in the US illegally have left voluntarily thanks to the influence of the government's messaging. British Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood said the allies are looking to do more work together,
particularly on how we deal with countries who do not take their citizens back. So making sure that we are able to return out of our countries people who have no right to be in our countries and send them back to their home countries.
People from Afghanistan, Eritrea, Iran, Sudan and Syria account for 55% of illegal immigration to the UK. However, citizens of all those countries receive just 3% of visas issued for legal entry. Mahmoud proposed cutting the number of visas granted to countries that do not accept the return of illegal immigrants. She also said they need to address pull factors.
As Home Secretary, I'm very clear we do have to deal with the pull factors that are making the UK a destination of choice for those that are on the move around the world.
As well as people smuggling and illegal immigration, the Five Eyes allies discussed new measures to tackle those behind child sexual abuse online and how to stop the spread of deadly synthetic opioids. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News.
In the Middle East, 2 terrorists opened fire on people at a bus stop near Jerusalem, killing 6 people and injuring over 20 others. Meanwhile, the Israeli Air Force has reportedly destroyed 50 buildings used by terrorists in Gaza City, one of the final strongholds of Hamas. NTD's Jaxson has the story.
Residents near Jerusalem ran between vehicles as gunshots rang out in the background. Officials said 2 Palestinian terrorists opened fire at a bus stop, killing 6 people and injuring at least 26. Israel's foreign ministry posted pictures on X of those who were killed by the terrorists, 5 men and 1 woman. Israel's President Isaac Herzog said in a post on X, quote, "This shocking attack reminds us once again that we are fighting absolute evil." The Israeli police said the 2 terrorists were shot and killed at the scene by a soldier and an armed civilian. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the area.
We will get everyone who helped them, everyone who sent them, and we will carry out even tougher measures. These murders, these attacks, in all fronts, do not discourage us. They only strengthen our determination to complete the missions we have taken upon ourselves.
Israeli forces later raided a house in the West Bank they said belonged to one of the terrorists. The policy of the Palestinian Authority, the entity currently governing the West Bank, is to award money to the families of terrorists who die while killing Israelis. Secretary of State Marco Rubio recently commented on the policy some call pay for slay.
The Palestinian Authority has its own set of problems. Pay for slay. They pay people to kill Israelis.
Meanwhile, President Trump gave an update on a possible ceasefire in the war in the Gaza Strip.
Some things came up having to do with Hamas, etc., and we're working on a solution that maybe could be very good. I think we're going to have a deal on Gaza very soon.
Israel continues to warn residents in the Gaza Strip to evacuate Gaza City, one of Hamas's final strongholds. Netanyahu said that the Israeli Air Force has destroyed 50 buildings in Gaza City that were being used for terrorist activity. Yet some residents have still not evacuated the city.
Seriously, we don't know what to do and where to go. The bombing is insane. It's insane beyond what a mind can imagine.
Hamas has been accused of preventing residents from evacuating in order to use them as human shields. Jaxson, NTD News.
France's government has fallen today after Parliament voted against a confidence vote to the Prime Minister. This leaves President Macron to decide whether to appoint a new Prime Minister, call snap elections, or step down himself. NTD international correspondent David Vives reports from Paris.
France is facing fresh political turmoil after Parliament voted on Monday to bring down the government over its plans to rein in the country's soaring national debt. Prime Minister François Bayrou, who had taken office just 9 months ago, must now submit his resignation.
Prime Minister François Bayrou said he would present his resignation to Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday. In response, political groups in Parliament have come forward with different proposals for what should happen next. Macron could appoint a new Prime Minister, plan new snap elections, or choose to resign.
Bayrou warned that France was between life and death, referring to the spiraling public deficit that successive governments have failed to control. In July, he presented a plan to cut spending. Facing calls for mass protests on social media, Bayrou called a confidence vote himself, urging lawmakers to support budget savings of over $50 billion. But opposition parties refused, with the 2027 presidential race already looming.
Today is a day of relief for millions of French people. Relief that you are taking with you your cruel and unjust budget plan that aimed to rob the French people.
The president has only one option, to call new elections and let the country choose. And if the people decide to choose a majority of challengers, so be it.
Recent poll by Elabe show Macron's approval rating at just 17%. On Monday, demonstrations were held across France, including outside Paris city halls in several districts. At the announcement of the confidence vote result, demonstrators celebrated.
194 vote for, 364 against.
There is a sense of radicalism in France at the moment. These group strategies, political strategies, I don't know. I'm not here to judge. I just think there is a lot of anger being expressed. I think this is a very significant result, which shows that the policies advocated by the government do not have majority support in the National Assembly, just as they do not have majority support in the country. So the fact that they do not have confidence will, it seems to me, force the president to call for snap elections.
The population is expressing, at a fundamental level, the fact that they are very unhappy and that this is affecting people's living conditions in France. There are many poor people who are struggling to get by.
The vote's result deepens France's political crisis and leaves President Macron searching for his fifth prime minister in less than 2 years. Financial markets are already signaling concern over the country's growing instability. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Coming up, President Trump launching a new national prayer initiative, donating his family Bible and calling on Americans to come together in faith. Mario Tsu at the White House. Is religious freedom under attack in American schools? This was the topic at today's hearing of the Religious Liberty Commission. Jack Bradley has the key takeaways when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump launching the America Prays initiative, tying the effort to America's 250th birthday celebrations. He's also donating his family Bible to the museum. NTD's Mario Tsu has more from the White House.
So America has always been a nation that believes in the power of prayer. And we will never apologize for our faith, ever, ever, never, never.
President Trump is launching the America Prays initiative at the second White House Religious Liberty Commission hearing today.
We will never surrender our God-given rights. We will defend our liberties, our values, our sovereignty, and we will defend our freedom.
The initiative is calling on Americans to gather together in groups and pray for the country and its citizens each week. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Scott Turner, who opened President Trump's first cabinet meeting this term in prayer, is announcing today that more than 70 major faith organizations and churches are joining together to participate in the initiative. The president is tying the America Prays initiative into celebrations of America's 250th birthday next year. In July, the president kicked off an official year-long celebration called America 250 at the Iowa State Fairgrounds, where he foregrounded faith as critical to the U.S.'s founding and future.
So as we chart our course toward the next 250 years, let us rededicate ourselves to one nation under God.
President Trump is also announcing that the Department of Education will soon issue new guidance protecting the right to prayer in public schools. And the president saying that his administration has no tolerance for terrorism or political violence as he recounts the Annunciation Catholic school shooting in August.
In recent years, we've seen far too many violent attacks perpetrated against Americans of faith, beautiful Americans of faith, including in our schools and places of worship. And I'll always remember it. What a horrible thing. Our hearts are shattered for the families of those beautiful children.
President Trump is also responding to the fatal stabbing of a 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee, calling it horrible and saying the U.S. needs to be able to handle evil like that. The stabbing, which happened on a train in Charlotte, North Carolina, is raising calls for action on public safety. This comes as the Trump administration is touting the results of the D.C. crime crackdown and seems to be eyeing Chicago as the next city for a federal intervention. Reporting from the White House, Mario Tsu, NTD News.
Students being taught gender ideology in elementary school, but not allowed to mention their faith in classrooms. The Justice Department's Religious Liberty Commission examined these issues at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. today. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
America was founded on faith, as we know.
The Religious Liberty Commission examining the eroding of First Amendment freedoms in the K-12 education system here at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. on Monday.
When faith gets weaker, our country seems to get weaker. When faith gets stronger, as it is right now, we're having a very good period of time.
It's part of a series of hearings examining the state of religious freedom in American institutions. Several students said they were treated unfairly by their teachers or school faculty because of their faith. They were either forced to learn things that went against their faith, or they were not allowed to bring up religion in school at all.
As my teacher read the book, My Shadow is Pink, I could tell immediately that the message went against my beliefs. It taught that gender could be chosen based on feelings rather than the way God created us. I didn't have any choice. I had to participate.
My favorite face mask. It was black with hot pink letters that had 3 simple words on it. Jesus loves me. A school official pulled me aside and told me to quickly take off my mask before the other kids got to lunch so that no one would see.
But when I submitted my speech, it was censored. Jesus Christ was crossed out completely.
Rather than focusing on simple basic civility and kindness, these books championed pride parades, gender transitioning, and pronoun preferences for elementary-age children.
The Religious Liberty Commission was created by President Trump back in May via executive order to examine the state of religious liberty across American institutions and to provide recommendations to bring it back.
When I was a kid, I think the first sex ed class we had was with a doctor and a priest when I was about 7th grade, and discussing the biological dimension, but the moral and religious dimension of it. But they'd be talking to a 7-year-old about gender and gender queering and changing genders strikes me as psychologically abusive. And then this physical business is physically abusive to children.
We're in a religious and cultural war. We have teachers in the classroom doing exactly what you were saying, conspiring with your child to lie to their parents.
The commission will hold more hearings later this year, and in the spring will provide a list of recommendations for President Trump to provide executive orders to strengthen religious liberty in America. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
As Christian students around the nation say their religious liberty is being trampled on, what tools do they need to protect their religious freedom? Jeremy Dice, senior counsel at First Liberty, shares telling cases and offers solutions tonight on Capitol Report with Steve Lance at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Coming up, Kyiv in flames as Russia struck a Ukrainian government building deep in the capital city. At least 4 were killed, including an infant. Allies condemned the attack and prepare to increase sanctions on Moscow. That's as President Trump says European leaders would return to the U.S. in the coming days to discuss efforts toward a ceasefire. Foreign affairs analyst Gerard Filitti joins us to unpack it all when we come back. And Venezuela's Maduro regime has been indicted for narco-terrorism in U.S. courts. It also has proven links to terrorist organizations like the Iran-backed Hezbollah. Luis Martinez reports. And U.S. tax dollars are aiding the Chinese Communist Party's military industry. That's according to a new congressional investigation. Melina Weiskup has the details on that when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A government building in flames after Russia hit Ukraine in its biggest strike of the war. At least 4 were killed, including an infant. President Trump condemned the attack as European Union officials prepare a new round of sanctions against Moscow and its close allies. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more.
Russia launched its largest air attack of the war on Ukraine overnight on Sunday. Ukrainian officials said the main government building in central Kiev was set on fire, and 4 people, including an infant, were killed. President Volodymyr Zelensky said the drone and missile barrage caused damage across the north, south and east of the country.
Clearly, Russia is trying to inflict pain on Ukraine with even more brazen attacks. This is a clear sign that Putin is testing the world, whether they will accept or tolerate this. That is why it is important that the statements of leaders, states, and institutions be backed by strong actions.
Russia launched 805 drones and 13 missiles against Ukraine. The Ukrainian Air Force said they downed 751 drones and 4 missiles. Thick smoke could be seen rising into the clear blue sky from the burning top floor of the main government building just after sunrise. Elsewhere in Kiev, residential apartments were hit and damaged. Dozens of residents, wrapped in blankets, gathered on the streets to survey the damage to their homes. Russian President Vladimir Putin has resisted calls for a ceasefire, emboldened by strengthening relations with China. President Trump said on Sunday he is ready to move to a second phase of sanctioning Russia.
They're losing 7,000 between Ukraine and Russia, 7,000 soldiers every single week. It's such a horrible waste of humanity. So, no, I am not thrilled with what's happening there, I will tell you.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said on Sunday that additional economic pressure could prompt Putin to enter peace talks. The Kremlin said on Monday that no sanctions would ever force Russia to change course in the Ukraine war. The European Union is currently drafting a 19th package of Russian sanctions. EU diplomats said it is likely to include more listings of Chinese companies, Russian banks and ships, as well as a transaction ban on Russian oil. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News.
And President Trump announced on Sunday that European leaders would return to the U.S. in the coming days to discuss the administration's ongoing efforts to end the war in Ukraine. He said the leaders would come to the White House individually to meet with him, but didn't provide specifics of who would be visiting. Joining us now to unpack all of this is Gerard Filitti. He's a foreign affairs analyst and attorney specializing in international law. Gerard, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you here. Now, first, which European countries do you think President Trump was hinting at here, and what could these meetings accomplish?
I think we can expect the same countries that came along with Zelensky to discuss the possibility of strengthening sanctions against Russia and also providing more military aid to Ukraine. So we're talking about Britain, Germany, France. We may see Italy again, the president of the European Union as well. So I think the usual countries plus I think we will see more representatives from Europe taking up discussions with the administration to see how there can be a whole of the continent approach to stopping Putin.
Now, ABC spoke with Zelensky over the weekend where he said it was a pity Ukraine wasn't part of the Alaska summit, but agreed with Trump that European leaders were continuing to buy Russian oil. How likely are we to see Europe take a more active role in security guarantees for Ukraine?
I think we will definitely see more active security guarantees, and I think that we will see Europe continuing to transition away from Russian oil and gas, which it has been doing for a number of years now, especially since the start of this war in 2022. I think that Europe does have the goal of, in a few years, being completely independent of gas or oil imports from Russia. And I think we will see a more active role from Europe. We will see them continuing to fund purchases of weapons that Ukraine needs to stay in this battle. And we will also likely see more training facilities opened up to Ukrainian service members to learn and become proficient in these new weapons.
Now, President Trump has said he's not happy with the war, but expressed optimism on getting the conflict settled. What might it take to bring Putin and Zelensky to the negotiating table?
Well, I think the hard challenge here is getting Putin to the table. Putin has shown himself unreliable as a partner in attempting to make peace. He is continuing these attacks, as we saw in the package leading into this segment, that there is no interest on his part in cutting down on the attacks, and he is pressing any military advantage that he has. For Russia to come to the peace table, they need to feel pain. They need to feel the economic pain of secondary sanctions and exclusion from the world community. Now, Russia may turn towards China and India, but this is only a stopgap measure and not significant. The Russian economy is very much at risk right now, and more pressure by the West on the Russian economy could very well bring Putin to the table in good faith.
Now, on top of the economic cost, there's also the human cost. President Trump saying thousands of soldiers are dying every week in the war. How sustainable is this for either side?
It's not. This is the tragedy of a war that we're seeing, that Russia is just putting more and more troops into this battle, letting them be slaughtered in Ukraine. They've even relied, as we know, on North Korean soldiers, on mercenaries from other countries. They're doing everything they can to feed the war machine. On the part of Ukraine, it's very unsustainable. There are only so many people in this country that can fight and go into battle for Ukraine. And the more we see battlefield injuries, the more we see general fatigue from fighting, this is absolutely not sustainable. So we're likely to see a diminution over time, but we're also seeing an increased reliance on technological means. This has been a war conducted by drones, by aircraft, by missile, not just by soldiers. And we're likely to see that continuing to shift towards unarmed combat.
And Gerard, shifting to the Middle East, President Trump issued a last warning to Hamas over the weekend to accept the deal to release all hostages or there would be consequences. What could these consequences look like?
I think the consequences are precisely what Israel is looking to do, which is to have the complete military dominance in Gaza, to enter Gaza City as it has been and fight house to house, building to building to secure the release of all the hostages. But more than that, to make sure that Hamas is no longer functioning as a terrorist force sponsored by Iran. That is really what Hamas is risking. It's risking complete annihilation unless it actually signs a ceasefire in which all of the hostages are released at once.
Now, expanding on that, this comes as Israel says their forces are in the last Hamas stronghold. How long can Hamas hold out? What is next in the region?
This is not going to be a short conflict. It may take Israel as long as a year to pacify Gaza City. And even then, we may have terrorists who are transiting through yet undetected tunnels to other parts of Gaza. So this will be a year-long operation. The IDF does not think it will be a quick operation. This is going to be a sustained campaign. But at the end, I think that we will see a complete change in Gaza once Hamas is gone.
And in terms of that end of the conflict, what would that look like? What's needed before the post-war Gaza conversations can begin?
Well, I think we need to have those post-war conversations before the conflict even ends. Israel is very quickly losing support in the international community, in part because it has not put forth its agenda on how to govern Gaza after Hamas is defeated. So that's something that needs to take priority. How do you feed these people? How do you redevelop and rebuild Gaza? And without the United Nations, I might add, which has been complicit in supporting Hamas. So these are really questions that Israel and the West need to address. And we need to see Arab countries stepping up to take more responsibility here because they understand the nature of this conflict better than most.
Well, Gerard Filitti, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
As military tensions grow in the South Caribbean Sea, the Islamic regime of Iran throws its support behind indicted narco-terrorist Nicolas Maduro. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has the details.
Since the deployment of U.S. military assets to the South Caribbean Sea last month, the Venezuelan regime of Nicolas Maduro has held multiple meetings with its counterparts in the Chinese Communist Party and now also with its counterparts in the Islamic regime of Iran. The Iranian regime has provided Venezuela with fast attack missile boats and military drones. The Venezuelan regime has also been accused of working with Iran-backed terrorist Hezbollah to launder money for narco-terrorist groups like Tren de Aragua.
So it is a drug cartel that is running Venezuela. This is a very important point. It is not a government, it is a drug cartel, a narco-trafficking organization that is running Venezuela. And this has been documented in federal court and indictments have been secured.
The U.S. has now deployed 10 F-35 stealth fighters to Puerto Rico to join U.S. military assets in the region to combat drug trafficking. This after the Venezuelan regime buzzed a U.S. destroyer with F-16s last week. The U.S. Navy and Marines also conducted military exercises in Puerto Rico over the weekend.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth traveled to Puerto Rico this Monday morning. Secretary Hegseth also boarded the USS Iwo Jima, an amphibious assault ship carrying a Marine Expeditionary Unit.
If you're trafficking drugs and you're a known cartel entity, a designated terror organization, and they're headed for the United States or part of a process that would head to the United States, that will have lethal consequences.
The U.S. has now 7 warships, a nuclear-powered submarine, a Poseidon-class air patrol aircraft, and some 4,000 Marines in the region. President Trump has not ruled out striking military targets inside Venezuela.
Are you considering attacking the cartels inside of Venezuela? You attack?
Well, you're going to find out. You're going to find out.
President Trump has also instructed the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Racine King, to shoot down enemy aircraft if they endanger U.S. military personnel in the region who are conducting drug interdiction missions. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
U.S. tax dollars are aiding the Chinese Communist Party's military industry. A new congressional investigation details how the CCP is exploiting taxpayers through joint collaboration between U.S. and Chinese research projects. NTD's Melina Weisskopf reports.
Hundreds of Pentagon grants valued at more than $2.5 billion help to fund sensitive research in collaboration with Chinese entities. The entities are tied to China's military industry, some already blacklisted by the U.S. government. Republicans on the Select Committee on the CCP wrote, "There is no justification for U.S. taxpayer-funded research to be conducted with entities documented to have facilitated human rights abuses or support China's mass surveillance apparatus." The committee highlighting a concern that's lingered for years.
So what we found is that a lot of the research that is being done under this joint venture, if you will, is benefiting the military. And of course, we know that the Chinese Communist Party is becoming more aggressive at home and around the world and is using every means to infiltrate our institutions and really disrupt our way of life.
The new 80-page committee report gave several examples. A nuclear scientist at the Carnegie Institution of Washington also held appointments at Chinese institutions. He used tax dollars from the Pentagon-backed research related to developing nuclear weapons. The Chinese regime acknowledged his work as contributing to national development goals. Chairman Molinar proposed legislation to require more transparency from federal researchers and stop the Pentagon from funding projects with links to blacklisted Chinese entities. The committee also made more than a dozen recommendations to the War Department, formerly known as the Department of Defense. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Coming up, a whistleblower claims California wildfire cleanups were mismanaged and costly. Audits have raised questions over hundreds of millions in contractor charges. Christina Corona reports. And in the NFL, Minnesota quarterback J.J. McCarthy makes his long-awaited debut tonight against Chicago. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Trudy Meyer. A whistleblower says California's wildfire cleanup projects have been mismanaged, wasting taxpayer money and leaving toxic contamination behind. He says he was fired after raising concerns over questionable charges by contractors. NTD's Christina Corona has more details on the story.
Steve Larson, a former state debris operations manager at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, says California's past wildfire cleanup projects wasted money and left toxic debris in burned communities. According to the LA Times, Larson claims he was fired after speaking up about the problems and took the state to court. The trial highlighted cleanup efforts after the 2018 Camp, Woolsey, and Hill fires, where FEMA reimbursed the state more than $1 billion. An audit by accounting firm EY found $457 million in extra contractor charges that weren't properly approved, along with allegedly sloppy record keeping and missing invoices. State officials and contractors denied any wrongdoing, saying all work followed federal cleanup standards. Some of these contractors are now handling cleanup for the Palisades and Eaton fires. Officials said they work to fix problems and protect communities. A jury found that Larson faced retaliation for speaking up, but also said the state had other reasons to let him go, such as performance issues and misconduct. The trial comes as FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers oversee new cleanup work after this year's Palisades and Eaton fires, where new complaints are already surfacing. Christina Corona, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on right now, but let's turn to the NFL as Monday Night Football starts up again tonight with Chicago playing at Minnesota. What will you be watching for?
Well, several things probably, Tip. I think it's really going to be the quarterback battle tonight. We've got Caleb Williams of the Bears and J.J. McCarthy for the Vikings. Now, both were first-round picks in 2024. Williams was the first overall pick, McCarthy the 10th overall pick. Williams had a nice season for the Bears. McCarthy, though, missed all of last season with a knee injury. But he steps into a very good situation with the Vikings. He has plenty of talent around him, especially to throw to. The Vikings went 14-3 last year, in part because they have Justin Jefferson at receiver, who's a two-time All-Pro there. Now, the Bears, meanwhile, after going 5-12, have a new head coach in Ben Johnson, who's considered one of the best play callers in the game. Vikings, though, are still 1.5-point favorites on the road at Chicago. And it starts at 8:15 Eastern time tonight. Now, Tiff will also be watching a couple of players for the Bears, DeAndre Swift and DJ Moore, because they are on the opposing fantasy football league in my team, on one of my other actually fantasy football leagues. Not this one where I'm getting killed right now in NTD. So just an FYI for you.
All right, well, elsewhere in the league, the New York Giants were non-committal yesterday when asked whether Russell Wilson would still start at quarterback next week. Have they made a decision on this?
Yeah, actually, Giants head coach Brian Daboll said today they will stick with Russell Wilson at quarterback for this week's game against the Cowboys on Sunday. Now, Wilson was 17 for 37 passing for 168 yards yesterday, and the Giants lost to the Redskins. Now, the Giants managed just 231 yards of total offense, no touchdowns, just 2 field goals. Now, this is probably going to be asked every time Wilson doesn't put up great numbers passing, or the offense doesn't do well, or the team loses, because the Giants just drafted quarterback Jaxson Dart in the first round this past spring, of course. And first-round picks are usually expected to play as rookies in most situations. So unless Wilson or the Giants' offense really excels, it seems inevitable Dart is eventually going to get into the lineup sooner rather than later, if you ask me.
Well, looking at tennis news, as President Trump showed up yesterday, second-ranked Carlos Alcaraz won the U.S. Open yesterday. Where does that put him in the ATP rankings?
Yeah, he's the new #1, just came out today, overtook Jannik Sinner, who he beat for the title. Now, just a word about the rankings. There's simply a rolling 52-week calculation of a player's 16 best tournament results. So it was actually a dramatic change for Alcaraz since he lost in the second round of the U.S. Open last year. So the points of losing on in 2024 are now exchanged for the points of winning the whole thing. It's almost a 2,000-point difference there, increase actually, for Alcaraz. Sinner, meanwhile, loses the points from winning it last year and replaces it from winning for the points you get for finishing runner-up. But that's about a 700-point decrease there. So Sinner loses 700, Alcaraz gains nearly 2,000. The difference was enough from the vault to #1. Now on the women's side, Aryna Sabalenka won, so no change in her points since she also won it last year. She stays at the top. Now meanwhile, American Amanda Anisimova, who finished runner-up at this year's event, vaults from 8th in the rankings up to #4. Now, if you remember, Anisimova finished also runner-up at Wimbledon just a couple months ago, so she's had quite a good season here.
So she's the one to watch.
Yes, she's the one to watch. She's the one, hopefully, one of these times I'm going to get tripped up on her name. It's so difficult here for some reason.
Well, if she keeps winning, you'll get to keep practicing.
Eventually, I'll get it, you know. I promise, Amanda, I'll get it eventually.
Well, moving to college football rankings, the new AP poll was released Sunday with Ohio State still in the top spot. What stood out to you, though, in the rankings?
Yeah, really, the top 3 teams remained the same. The Ohio State, Penn State, and LSU. Now, last weekend featured a lot of, we call cupcake games for the top 25 teams. So it really mattered by how much you won. And Georgia figured that out pretty quickly. They fell from 4th to 6th after a somewhat uninspiring win over Austin Peay. Now that was to make room for Oregon, who went from 6th to 4th after absolutely blowing out Oklahoma State, who's actually not a cupcake, by the way, but they won 69-3 there. Now some other big news. Florida State jumps 4 spots to #10 after beating East Texas A&M 77-3 on Saturday. Clemson, meanwhile, fell 4 spots despite they beat Troy 27-16. Now the biggest moves outside the top 10 though were Oklahoma moving up 5 spots to #13 after beating Michigan. The Wolverines meanwhile fell 8 spots to 23rd. Tennessee also jumped 7 spots to 15th after blowing out East Tennessee State. And finally, Utah moved up 5 spots to #20 after beating Cal Poly 69-3. So yeah, a lot going on. Hopefully you got all that, Tiff.
Oh, yeah, you know my notes.
I'm planning to give you a little quiz later, all right?
All right, sports pop quiz. Well, Dave, as always, until then, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.